How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Average Joe, the series where I'll be taking a look at a vehicle and telling you whether or not I believe it's worth the average player's time or money. On today's episode, we're going to be covering the squadron vehicle, the SU-33, a Rank 8 13.0 fighter jet in the Soviet air tech tree. With all that out of the way, let's jump right into what this vehicle is capable of, starting off with the weaponry. Starting off with your primary weapon, you're going to be armed with the GSH-30, which is one of my favorite guns in the entire game to use. You will only be armed with 150 rounds, however, it is still plenty, considering the fact that you're not really going to use it all too much, and even when you do, it typically does quite a lot of damage. Now, unfortunately, despite the fact that I do love this 30mm with all my heart, it is unfortunately not really a great asset. Despite the fact that it is a very good gun, that does not change the fact that at 13.0 you really won't be using your gun very often. In most scenarios that you could use your gun, you're probably better off using missiles anyway, or just not taking the head-on, because let's be honest, you're probably using this in head-ons thinking that's not going to get you killed. At the end of the day, the gun should be your last resort, or only used for snapshots if somebody barely flies in front of you before you can get a missile off on them, or they're too close to use a missile. Moving on to secondary weapons, this is what we will be talking about a majority of the video due to the fact that you can carry 12 missiles. Now, I will not be talking about your air-to-ground ordnance because that's just not what I do on this channel, however, we will be going in depth on all three of the missiles that this plane can carry. Starting off with the R-73, which is most likely the most infamous of these three missiles that we'll be talking about due to the fact that when it got added to the game along with the AIM-9M, it kind of broke the game for a while, and rightfully so. Now, as of the time of recording, the R-73 is probably the best close-range missile in the game, other than maybe the Misc, due to the fact that it is an IR thrust-vectoring IRCCM missile that can pull way more Gs than the stat card would let on. Despite the fact that the card says that it can only pull 40 Gs as its maximum overload, it can easily pull more than that, allowing this missile to, well, do a 180 if it really feels like it, and then still chase down a target nearly 2 kilometers away. Now, due to the fact that the R-73 has IRCCM, this missile is incredibly flare resistant, to a point where in frontal aspect and side aspect and closer ranges it will still ignore flares, but in rear aspect it will basically always ignore them unless the opponent knows how to properly flare the missile by getting the flare between the seeker and the source of the heat, aka their engine. Now, this missile is plagued with two major issues, one of them being kind of funny and the other one being something similar to the R-60Ms. Where the R-60M has very little range, this missile does have more than it, just not by a lot. You could reach a target that's about 2.5 kilometers away, however if they maneuver basically at all, especially once the burner goes out on this missile, it's probably not going to make it to the target anymore. I would say try to stick within 2 kilometers. If you fire a missile at that sort of range, it typically will reach. So if you can stick to that range, you should be golden. The other problem with the missile is the fact that it has a bit of a tendency to spin out whenever you try to do high-angle off-bore shots. Now, this should be expected, especially at low speed. The missile will just try and turn way too hard and overcorrect with the thrust vectoring, and it will just start spinning because it can't course correct itself anymore. The simplest way to avoid this happening to you is just don't try to go for too absurd of a shot, especially at low speeds, and then you shouldn't really see this all too often. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about in regards to the R-73 is the fact that you could carry 6 of them, but like you'll see in the background gameplay, I'm only carrying 4, and that's for a very simple reason. And that reason is because that on those 2 inner pylons, you could also carry instead a R-27ER or an R-27ET. In fact, those 2 inner pylons are the only pylons that let you carry the R-27ET, and I believe that they are too valuable of an asset not to bring. Speaking of the R-27ET, that is what we're going to be talking about next. Now, I will say this is the missile that I understand the least about on the plane, so if I get anything wrong about it, I am sorry. Please let me know in the comments what I got wrong, and, let me know what is correct. Now, to my knowledge, the R-27ET is basically an R-27T seeker strapped onto the R-27ER's body, meaning that you basically get an extremely high-range missile with 35 Gs of pull, with IRCCM very similar, yet not identical to my knowledge, to the R-73. Now, to pair with all of that maneuverability and high range, this missile is also about as quick as the Flash as far as I can tell, maybe just a tad faster. Now, the reason that I say to bring 2 of these instead of bringing the 6 R-73s is purely because of the fact that this missile is an incredible piece of utility. If you can get behind somebody or even get to the side of somebody that doesn't know you're there and fire one of these off at around 8 or 9 kilometers, even if they're going away from you, it'll probably reach them even if they drop flares. This missile is basically a rocket-propelled sniper rifle. It is just incredible. It's easily my favorite part of this plane, if I'm being honest. I had way too much fun with these. I wish you could carry more than 2 of them, but like I said, unfortunately, those 2 pylons are the only ones that allow you to bring them. Highly recommend bringing them over the extra 2 R-73s. Seriously, these missiles are just fantastic. Moving on to the final missile, we have the R-27ER. So when it comes to the R-27ER, you can basically take everything I said about the ET and apply it to this, other than the fact that this is a SAR missile, a semi-active radar homing missile, meaning you have to guide it with, well, your radar. Now, unfortunately, it's not a Fox 3, meaning it will not guide itself. You need to keep a radar lock the whole time, or at least the majority of the time. Now, like I said previously, missile, incredibly fast. 35 Gs of pull, just incredible. Insanely high range. This missile is probably the best Fox 1 in the entire game. There's nothing that even comes close to it. Now, I said in the MiG-29 video, and I'll say it again, the fact that this missile you can actually unlock with your radar, it either relock that same target or lock a different target, and the missile will guide to whichever thing you lock onto again. That is something that very few missiles in the game will do without either just exploding instantly or just not listening to your radar. Now, when it comes to using this missile, I'd honestly recommend one of 3 ways. Either using it in close to medium range head-ons against people that you either think are going to pull up off the ground or just aren't low enough to multipath it. Now, when doing this type of combat, I would suggest firing the missile between 4 kilometers and 7 kilometers. You can fire it further away, you can fire it closer. However, this is just the range that has worked the best for me because it gives people typically not enough time to really hit the deck if they are too high up, but it also gives the missile enough time to get up to speed and maneuver when needed. The other most common way that I find myself using this missile is against people at medium range that are about 15-16 kilometers away, but are really high up. And by really high up, I mean at least 2,000 meters off the ground. You could do higher, obviously, the higher the better. However, when using the missile in this way, keep in mind people can definitely notch it and people can still try and hit the deck. However, the reason that I typically use the missile like this still at these ranges and everything is because the fact that people that are that high up aren't usually paying attention. So if you wait for that range where the missile is going to be up to speed and still incredibly maneuverable, unless they notch it or see the missile and hit the deck, they're probably going to get slammed by it. And lastly, when it comes to this missile, you can use it for beyond visual range combat. Now, because of your battle rating, you will be fighting Fox 3 missiles, which are infinitely better at this type of combat than your missile. However, you can still do it. I would not suggest it, but if you plan on doing it, 30 kilometers is as far as I'm willing to go. You could probably go further, especially when you're at higher altitudes. I just do not think that you should. In my opinion, it's a bit of a waste of a missile, but at the end of the day, you have 12 missiles, and in my case, I'm bringing 6 of the R-27ERs. You could bring 8, but yet again, 2 of them share a slot with either the ET or the R-73 if you wanted to bring extra of those. So keep in mind, you do have to pick. I would say bring 6 of these, 2 ETs, and 4 R-73s. Now then, with weapons out of the way, let's talk about flight performance, because despite the fact that this thing is incredibly heavy, it's actually also pretty maneuverable at medium to low speed. Now at high speed, you are less maneuverable than the base SU-27, I believe. However, it is still quite maneuverable. It does not compress super hard. However, compared to something like an F-16, an F-15, any of those really, you will be, well, a brick in comparison. Now, when it comes to acceleration, you are pretty middle of the pack. Nothing great, nothing bad. However, your high-speed acceleration does suffer a little bit, especially around Mach 1. Speaking of Mach, your top speed on the deck is going to be around Mach 1.16. To pair with that, your red line will also be about 1460 kilometers an hour IAS. Just keep that in mind. It's probably never going to happen even if you're going just in a straight line. However, if you spawn in on, say, an air spawn map, and you try to hit the deck as fast as possible, you could rip your wing if you're not careful. Now, just because somebody will mention it if I don't, yes, full reel on this plane is incredibly funny. However, even without it, you're still incredibly maneuverable at medium speed and low speed. Around 700 kilometers an hour and 800 kilometers an hour, your maneuverability is just fantastic. You pull an insane amount of AOA, you turn incredibly quick, but unfortunately you do bleed speed just as quick. so you're not going to be sticking with that maneuverability for long. But yes, you can do funny things with full reel, and pair that with the fact that you have HMD, you can do even funnier things with the R-73 due to it. You can do basically a 180 at the right speed with this plane, and then fire a missile at somebody behind you with HMD on the R-73, and, well, all of a sudden, you're still going forward, and they have a missile going at them from somebody that's now behind them. Never do it in a real game, though. Trust me. You're just going to lose all your speed instantly. You're going to go from 900 down to probably 150 kilometers an hour, and you're just going to start falling out of the sky. It's an all-or-nothing gambit, and it's probably just going to get you killed. Now then, let's talk about a few miscellaneous things. First off, I already said that you do have HMD on this plane. To pair with that, obviously it's going to work with your radar. Now I will say, the radar on this plane is not great. As far as I can tell, I believe it's the exact same radar that is found on the SU-27, also at 13.0. Not great, it's also not terrible though. A lot of people seem to complain about it. I've had a few bugs here and there where it just does the typical thing where the radar breaks and just tries to lock the same spot forever until you turn the radar off and back on again. But overall, the radar has treated me pretty well, especially in HMD mode. Now, one of the drawbacks of the plane is the fact that it does only get 48 countermeasures, which is criminal for the battle rating. However, they are all large caliber countermeasures. Now, I bring half and half personally. Depending on what type of missile you end up finding yourself against, more often than not, I would say either bring more chaff or more flares. But I find myself being shot at with both fairly frequently, so I'm running both 50-50. While we're on the topic of things meant to keep you alive, let's talk about the RWR. Now, as far as I can tell, the RWR is just, well, good. It's not a bad RWR by any means. It's nothing spectacular, but it's far from bad. However, it does have one thing that makes me feel like I'm going insane, and that is the fact that the blind spot on top and below your plane feel like they're much bigger than on other planes, but at the same time, I have no evidence of this other than the fact that I just feel like that's the case, and it makes me feel like I'm going insane. So if you notice the same thing, either you're insane as well, or I'm right. So, yeah. Now that that is all out of the way, let's talk about whether or not I believe this vehicle is worth your time or your money. I know, this has been easily my longest one of these reviews. I am sorry, I just really enjoyed this plane. Now, due to the fact that this is a squadron vehicle, I'm going to say whether or not I believe it's worth the money first, then whether or not I believe it's worth the time, and then lastly, I'm going to say which one of those two I think that you should do. Alright, first things first. This thing will cost you 8,200 Golden Eagles. If you would like to buy it for Golden Eagles. Don't. Do not. As far as I can tell, squadron vehicles never go on sale when it comes to their Golden Eagle cost. Do not buy it for Golden Eagles, it is not worth it. Now, because it's a squadron vehicle, it's not even going to give you any sort of premium bonuses. It's not going to give you any SL, RP bonuses, nothing like that. It's going to give you a penalty if you try to research anything below rank 7. So just do not buy it, unless, you know, you have money to burn, I guess. Who am I to tell you what to spend your money on? I mean, it's only like you watch the entire video to get my, opinion of it. Now then, if you'd rather research it instead of purchasing it, it's still going to be kind of annoying. It's going to be 580,000 squadron points, which is going to take quite a lot of time. On top of that, if you don't buy it with Golden Eagles, you have to pay the SL cost, which is over 1.1 million SL. On top of that, you'll still need to pay the crew cost, which is over 300,000 SL. It's pretty expensive just to crew the plane, let alone buy the plane. However, this is to be expected because it's like researching a plane at the end of a tech tree. You have to pay all the costs for the plane because you didn't use Golden Eagles to purchase it. And whether or not you purchased it with Squadron Points, Golden Eagles, no matter how you got your hands on this plane, you have to research and purchase all of the modules. So keep that in mind. Now, due to the fact that I genuinely think this plane is incredible, and because of the fact that it's free at the end of the day if you do it through Squadron Research, yes, I do think it's worth it if you do it that way. And if you couldn't already tell, yeah, the answer is Squadron Points over Golden Eagles. Get it for free. Don't buy it like I did. I did purely just to make the video. Don't do what I did, do as I say, not as I do, and all that. Now, this wasn't a guide of the plane by any means, and I'm sorry if you came here looking for that. I know my videos, despite the fact that, they're reviews, they're in the title, you might think that's meant to be a guide on how to play the vehicle. I will give one little tip before I leave, and that is play this plane as a bit of a flanker. I'll let myself out. In all seriousness, though, this plane is incredibly well suited as an ambush fighter, especially because of the R-27ET. So, yeah, Though it was a terrible joke, I wasn't joking at the same time. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please let me know in the comments if there's any vehicles you'd like to see in the future of the series. Have a good one.
The missile knows... Because it knows where it isn't.